What's up, everybody? Joe Brown here. This is the Heresy Financial Show, and this video is a recording of a lecture, a guest lecture that I gave at ASU for a grad class on blockchain. This guest lecture was on the history of money, so it talked about the last couple thousand years and how monetary systems have evolved and changed throughout the years, kind of an understanding of how economies work based on what kind of monetary system is being used, and the phase change that we're kind of going through right now, looking at central bank digital currencies, fiat, Bitcoin, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, gold, things like that. So there's no video here, so we're going to go to a blank screen, and the audio, I cleaned it up as much as possible here. If you are interested in just listening to the audio, this is also posted as a podcast episode on my podcast, which, as you might be aware, my podcast is on every podcast platform, and it's just the audio version of all my YouTube videos. So knowing that this doesn't have a video attached to it, if you just want to listen to the audio, feel free to go on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much and hope you enjoy it. Who knows what the word heresy means?
Heresy?
Heresy. Anybody ever heard that word?
Yeah.
Or a heretic.
Or heretic? Yeah. Anybody? Shout it out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like when you are going against what is orthodox or
Yes.
normal, I guess normal.
Right. Yeah. So a classic example, Galileo. He was declared a heretic because he said the world went around the sun, not the other way around. The church said, "Oh, you're a heretic. That goes against the common understanding of what's true." Later, it was, obviously he was right about that. And so what I do, I talk about things that are considered heresy to the mainstream kind of financial narrative, whether it's economics or investing, things that be back there.
Sorry.
No worries. And so we talk about these kind of things because usually after a long period of time, we can look back and say, oh, this was the narrative was, one way because it served the purpose of who was pushing the narrative, but really in reality, the truth is something else. And so that's kind of who I am and what I talk about and what I do. And today like we said, we're talking about the history of money and how it looks like right now we're at a phase change point where the monetary system is changing to something that it hasn't been for a very long time. And contrary to popular belief, we have had a blockchain or a public ledger monetary system in the world before, and we can touch on that in a little bit. But first, we're going to look at one of the original monetary systems, which is gold as money. Now, this is not the first monetary system. If you look at David Graeber, the late David Graeber, he wrote a book called Debt, the First 5,000 Years. And in that book, he details how the oldest monetary systems on record that we have from anthropological evidence are debt-based credit monetary systems. They were not commodity-based monetary systems. But those are very old, and we've got at least 4,000 years between then and now. For about 3,000 or 4,000 years, we had this gold as money monetary system. So we're going to look at a couple of phase changes that happened with monetary systems throughout history. This one is gold as money. So this is not a gold exchange standard. This is not a gold standard. This is gold as money. This is a commodity monetary system. So in order to understand how this is very different than what we have today, we're going to look at the game of Monopoly. So everybody played Monopoly before? So in the game of Monopoly, what is the thing that ends the game? When does the game end?
Basically, when someone owns all the property and you're basically having to pay them and everybody's owing them.
When everybody is owing them, when everybody owns something and then somebody runs out of cash and then everybody runs out of cash, so one person is left with it all. Is Monopoly an inflationary monetary system or a deflationary monetary system? Deflationary. Why is it deflationary?
Because when the goods outnumber or outvalue your ability to purchase, then it's deflation.
Fixed money supply too, right?
Gotcha. Yes. Yeah. So both of those. Yeah, absolutely. When you have a fixed monetary supply, the exchange of goods and services, especially in a real economy, not the game, goods and services will grow. So the amount of wealth in the system grows. So money is not wealth, money is how you measure the wealth in the system. So when we have a fixed supply of money, you end up having people go bust. You end up having bankruptcy happen. Money gets exchanged for goods and services. Somebody goes bankrupt. Prices, on average, and in a system like this, if this were real life and plays out, would end up falling over time. Now, monopoly doesn't do a great job of capturing exactly what real life would be like because the pool of wealth is fixed in monopoly, right? You can't create more properties in the game of monopoly. But in real life, that's what's happening. People are constantly finding new technologies, more efficient ways of producing food and goods and services, and replacing human labor with things like fire, so you can get more nutrients from your food, so you don't have to look for food as much. You offload human labor to animals, so you don't have to do as much farming yourself. You offload human labor to machines during the Industrial Revolution to maximize productivity. And so we've got all of these massive gains in efficiency, productivity, technology that grows the total pool of wealth, because growing the total pool of wealth means you're getting more for less. It takes less human labor, less human time, less human capital in order to get the things that you want. And over history, the total pool of wealth has grown significantly. So in a monetary system where you have gold as money, does the money supply grow extremely quickly or not at all? If gold is money, yeah.
I would say it doesn't. It basically, it balances out. It doesn't.
So if gold is money, how would the money supply grow?
Source the gold.
You got to pull it out of the ground. So does anybody know the average rate of the growth in gold percentage-wise over time? 10,000 years, 5,000 years, 1,000 years.
No.
On average, it's about 1.5%.
Oh, no.
It has never exceeded 2%, and on average, yeah, per year, yep. And it has never exceeded the growth in population.
Wow.
So it's, but on average, it's about 1.5%. So it's not zero, whereas we know Bitcoin will eventually approach zero. The inflation, the monetary policy of Bitcoin, it'll eventually get to zero. And when you consider lost coins and things like that, it might be slightly negative. Gold grows by about 1.5% per year. In a monetary system where the money supply grows by 1.5% every year, when we look back through history at all of the gains in the total pool of wealth growing, do you think that the total pool of wealth grew faster than the money supply or slower?
Faster.
Much faster over time. So people got more for less. Everybody got wealthier. If you look at the time period after the Civil War, from about 1860, 1870 to the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, but we'll just go to 1910. When you look at those 40 years, you had a deflation over the long period of time where prices fell. You had deflation, nominal deflation in wages. So people's wages came down over that time. But when you adjusted for it, so when you look at real wages and real wealth, it actually grew, because the cost of living dropped so dramatically each year that even though your wages were dropping, you were still able to afford more things, because life just got that much more cheaper over that amount of time. During that period of time, we had a very slow growth of the money supply. Now we're going to look at, just to drive this point home, we're going to imagine that we all go to a desert island and we have to form our own closed economy. Who has physical cash with them right now? Okay, you don't have to give exact, but how much physical cash do you have with you? 50? 25? All right, yeah, you? 6? Perfect. Let's say we've got $100 total cash. We all, like the TV show Lost from years ago, we all crash landed on an island, and now we have to form our own closed economy, and we just say dollars are still our money. We've got our closed economy. So some of us are going to go fishing, right, because we need to eat. Some of us are going to go look for coconuts because we need, something other than fish and some liquid from the coconuts. Some of us are going to go find some natural spring water. Some of us are going to start building little huts and shelters to live in. So we're all going to start to form our own little specialties. Now, you three are the only ones with money in this system right now, right? So if I want to get some of your money, what do I have to do?
You gotta trade with me. So,
Trade anything or trade what?
like your food or building, a place for me to stay or.
So what if
fresh water.
what if I build a place to stay that only is 4 feet long, so there's not enough room to lay down? Would you give me some of your money for that? No. You would want a little bit more space that you could lay down. What if I gathered 600 coconuts and I tried to give you 600 coconuts for all of your cash? Would you do that?
No.
So how many coconuts do you want from me today?
Maybe about 5 or 6.
About 5 or 6? Okay. So here we're demonstrating something about value. Is value objective or subjective?
It's subjective.
Value is subjective. Now, do you guys know the difference between cardinal lists and ordinal lists?
No.
Okay, cardinal is like an absolute ranking. Like I'm number 1, you're number 2, you're number 3. Ordinal is when there's an order. It's not, I don't have the absolute position of one. I just know that I come before you do. So an ordinal list in terms of value means that you want 1 coconut more than you want, let's say, $1. But that doesn't mean you want all the coconuts more than you want all the dollars. You're going to stop giving me dollars for coconuts once you've hit 6. That doesn't mean that the dollar is objectively more valuable than the coconut. It just means that you want that first coconut more than you want that first dollar, and the second coconut more than you want that second dollar, and the third coconut. But once you hit 6, now that dollar is more valuable to you than that coconut. Has anybody ever shopped for a sale on soda or meat or anything at the grocery store? You go and shop for the sale. So you go to the sale and you say, okay, I'm going to buy 2 of these things because they're on sale, 20% off, they're cheaper, right? But you don't buy 1,000 of them. You buy only what you want up until the point where that extra one that you buy is no longer more valuable to you than the dollar that you still have. The third thing that this demonstrates about value is that exchange only happens when it is profitable to both sides. Because when I give you 6 coconuts for $6, did you profit? Did you get something you wanted
Yes.
more than something you didn't want?
Yes.
Yes. Did I profit?
Yes.
Yes. We both profited. We both got something that we wanted more than what we had. And so exchange only happens when both sides believe they are profiting, unless the exchange is forced on them. So if I come at you with a gun or a sword on this island, I say, give me your dollars, then that's obviously not the case. But in a free exchange of goods and services and a store of value, exchange will only happen when both parties believe that they are profiting. They're both better off. So in this monetary system, are we going to have a fixed number of coconuts, or are they going to, over time, grow when we're on this island? Are we going to get more coconuts over time or less?
They'll grow on the trees, right?
They'll grow on the trees, and if everybody really likes coconuts, somebody's going to start farming them, right? So I would guess that the total supply of coconuts would grow over time. What about the total supply of huts? We start off with 0 huts. Is the number of huts going to grow or decline? I think it's going to grow because somebody's going to realize everybody wants a place to sleep. So somebody's going to keep on building huts more and more. What about the total supply of fish? We start off with 0. Is the total supply of fish going to grow or decline? Probably grow. So all of these things that we need are going to grow. How much money is there in the system? $100. So at the beginning, I'm going to give you 6 coconuts. You're going to give me $6. In a year from now, when everybody has a small coconut farm on their own little hut property and is getting 6 coconuts a day, if I come to you and I say, hey, I've got 6 coconuts, give me $6, what are you going to say?
I don't need your coconuts.
You don't need my coconuts.
I have my own.
Right. They became so abundant But are they worth $1 anymore?
Nope.
No. And that's what everything does. Eventually, the total supply of the real pool of wealth grows so dramatically that the value of the currency, the dollar, the money, the store of value, goes down relative to the total pool of wealth. So the money supply didn't change, but the total pool of wealth grew because that's what humans do. That means that the value of the money declined. So if I have $1 and I want to go buy something with it, is it going to buy a lot of things or very few things? A lot of things. So I've got 6 coconuts, you won't give me $1 for it. But if I bring you, somehow I obtain the rights to every coconut farm on the island, would you give me $1 for that? Probably, because then you control the entire production of coconuts. So the value of each unit of currency, of each unit of money, goes up dramatically and the purchasing power increases. So when we have a gold-based monetary system, where the money supply only grows by 1, 1.5, maybe 2% every single year, but the total pool of wealth on earth is growing extremely quickly, money buys more. You get more for less. And so each unit of currency increases in purchasing power. People get richer over time instead of poorer. You save a little bit one year. That savings grows each year. You can buy more with it the longer you wait to spend. You don't get a raise. That's okay. Your cost of living went down this year. So in real terms, you got a raise. People get richer over time just by saving and avoiding debt and working hard. And that's the way that this monetary system worked for a couple thousand years. The problem is, what happens to the money in terms of its value relative to all this stuff? Does the money get more valuable or less valuable?
Less valuable.
The money gets more valuable. You can buy more things with it. So the money gets more valuable per unit relative to all the stuff. So a gold coin like this, maybe 3,000 years ago, you slap that down on the counter and you say, give me a sandwich and a drink and a place to stay for the night. And that's what it'll buy for you. You wait 1,000 years and the total pool of wealth has grown so dramatically relative to the pool of money, the supply of money, that you go slap this down on the counter and it's going to buy for you a lot more than just lunch and a drink. Maybe it buys you a horse. Maybe it buys you down payment on a property. So if you're one of the few who still has this much money, are you going to want to carry that around with you in your pocket? No, that is way too valuable. Risk of theft, and you can't, it's not practical. Like today, this 1 ounce coin, if it's got a full ounce of gold in it, is worth about $1,900. So you're not going to go to the grocery store and give that to them. They're not going to have the change for that. You're not going to try and buy, $2,000 worth of groceries in 1 week. You need change for that. You need smaller denominations. So what happens over time is the money gets so valuable that you enter a situation where something like this comes about. This is the Bank of San Francisco. Yeah, First National Gold Bank of San Francisco. Now, do you guys notice at the bottom it says we'll pay to the bearer on demand $5 gold coin. So the word dollar originally meant a specific weight of gold. So when it says $5 gold coin, that's talking about a specific weight worth of gold, specific number of grams. So this is a bank note. So you enter into a situation where banks have an opportunity to perform a valuable service for people. You've got a gold coin. You don't want to take it to the grocery store with you. So you're going to give it to somebody with a vault and a security system. And you're going to say, store it for me. They're going to give you this piece of paper. And it says to the bearer, this is a bearer note. Has anybody ever seen, we've seen the Die Hard Christmas movie, the original Die Hard one, right? Do you remember what he was trying to steal in the vault? Hans Gruber was trying to steal bearer bonds. They're called bearer bonds, just like cash and just like these banknotes, because they are redeemable to the bearer, whoever has them. There's no name on it. There's no serial number recorded who owns it. It's a bearer instrument, meaning whoever holds it holds the value, has the value. Just like gold. If I steal your gold coin and I go and try and buy something with it, they're going to take it. Gold is a bearer instrument. So when you give your gold to a bank to hold on to it for you, you want a bearer instrument in its place. Now, in a situation like this where you have paper now circulating instead of the gold. Let's say everybody, all of us on our island, somebody starts a bank, we all put our gold in, we all get cash out for the exact same amount. Has the money supply changed at all? No. We put in 100 gold coins, we take out 100 pieces of paper. So at this point, while we're circulating that paper, has there been any change in prices as a result?
No.
No. What about any change in value of the money versus the total pool of wealth? No. It's the exact same thing as still using the gold. However, when you have somebody who gets a giant vault full of gold, they're going to start to think, I can do stuff with this. They're going to look around, and if I have all of your gold and you're now using paper, if you want to go buy a horse, you could give me your paper. I could give you back your gold. You could take your gold over here. You could buy the horse. You get your horse. You get the gold. Now you come back to me with that gold. Give me the gold, and I give you paper. That is a convoluted process, and it's inconvenient. You have the paper, and it says pay to the bearer on demand. So that paper is worth the same amount of gold to you as it is to you. So you're going to just take that paper and give it for the horse. And then at any time you want, you can just bring that paper back to me and get your gold. So the paper is worth the exact same as the gold in this situation. So me as the banker, I'm looking around and I'm seeing everybody's just trading their paper. Nobody is coming to get their gold. I've got a vault full of gold. I can make money off of this. So I'm going to say, hey, does anybody need a loan? Does anybody need to borrow money? So you're going to come to me and you're going to say, hey, I'd like to borrow a gold coin. I'll say, great, you can have this gold coin. You owe me back, 5% interest in a year. So you take that gold coin. At that moment, has the money supply changed?
Yes.
Yes, because that one gold coin was already being represented in circulation by a piece of paper. Now that gold coin entered into circulation. So that piece of gold is being represented twice in the total supply of money. Now that one little change might not make a noticeable difference to anybody, but I'm a banker and I see that and I see that it works and I'm making 5% for free and nobody knows because everybody thinks I'm just lending out my own money. And nobody realizes that if everybody comes to turn their paper right now to get their gold, one person won't get their gold. So nobody realizes that, and I see an opportunity to profit even more. So I lend out some more gold. And maybe I keep 10% of the gold in reserve so that if a couple people come up to get their gold, I can still give it to them so that nobody realizes that I don't have everybody's gold anymore. Now we looked at what happened in a monetary system where the total pool of wealth grows and the money supply stays the same. That means things get cheaper as the total pool of wealth grows and the money gets more valuable relative to all this stuff. In this system, I've just done what to the money supply? Grew it exponentially, or did it stay the same, or did it shrink? Grown it very quickly. So maybe it grows by 50% or 80% or 100%. So this is the opposite. So what do you think happens to the prices of the total pool of wealth? Goes up or goes down?
Prices of product would go up.
The prices of everything will go up. Because now instead of the money being more valuable relative to all the stuff is more valuable relative to all the money. The money supply is growing faster. The total supply of wealth, the total pool of goods and services are not growing as fast as the total pool of money. And so if I want to get some stuff now, instead of it taking less money to get stuff, it takes more money to get stuff.
It's interesting, Joe, though, in the mid 1800s, when you had these banks just starting to fiddle around with issuing notes, right? There were runs on these banks a lot of times, and these banks went bust, right? So these banks would start to do what Joe describes, and they would start issuing notes, and then people would get sly to the fact that they were issuing notes beyond the amount of gold they were holding in reserve, and they would come to the bank, everybody at once, and say, hey, I want my gold, give me my gold. And the bank would be like, oh no, but we used kind of this leverage thing, and they didn't make it necessarily known to everybody that they were issuing notes to. So, okay, yeah, you've got a slide here.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens next. Yeah, go ahead.
I remember in some parts of the world, they used to have like goldsmiths that would basically do the same thing.
Yes. Yeah, goldsmiths were the original banks and they did this first. And eventually it turned into the business of banking, but 100% they were the first ones to start this process. So when prices are going up, everybody feels like they're getting rich because the stuff that they're selling is worth more. Everybody's getting more money in their pockets. Everybody feels like they're getting rich. But you have to remember, what was that growth of the money supply built on? Was it built on the actual pool of wealth growing?
No.
No,
Was it built on the real supply of money growing?
no.
It was built on debt. That money was loaned into existence. So before, if I want to borrow money, you will have a gold coin, I'll borrow it from you and I'll spend it. The total supply of money didn't change because now you don't have that money that I took from you and I spent. But in this system, when you have the paper money that's backed up by the gold, now we have a gold standard and it's called fractional reserve banking, where banks will lend money into existence because every loan is now that grows the money supply. They loaned money that wasn't there before. One piece of money is being represented twice in circulation. Prices go up, but it's built on debt. What has to happen to debt eventually?
It has to be paid.
It has to be paid off. So your loan's going to come due first. So when you pay your debt off, if that money came into existence by me loaning it into existence, what happens to the money supply when you pay that debt off? Does it stay the same or does it decrease?
Decreases.
The money supply decreases when the debt is paid off. Because if the debt loaned money into existence, the money supply grew from that new loan. When the loan is paid off, that money is no longer in circulation anymore. So now the money supply shrinks. So at some point, the debt starts getting paid off. The money supply starts to shrink. And what do we know about systems where the money supply starts to shrink relative to the total pool of goods and services? What happens to prices? When the money supply shrinks, we have deflation, so the prices go down. Well, if everybody's just been experiencing a false wealth effect from prices going up, people think they're getting rich and they're buying things and selling things, making a bunch of money. And then suddenly when the debt starts to get paid off, the opposite starts to happen, prices start to come down. What's everybody going to do? Most of the time, people start to sell in a panic because they say, I was getting rich, like in 2005, 2006, people were getting rich on real estate. Everybody had to sell at the same time because prices start to plummet everywhere. People get scared. You start to sell to get your money. You owe the bank more than what your stuff is worth. So you have to sell everything to go turn your money in to pay off that loan. But that makes the total supply of money shrink even faster. So you enter into a giant bust. So a bust or a crash is not the result of random economics. It's not the result of animal spirits. If you ever taken the Econ 101, it's not the result of something that's unexplainable or bad, fiscal policy or monetary policy. What it's a result of is the boom that happened in the first place that was built on credit, which is an artificial expansion of the money supply. It's the explosion of the money supply built on credit that makes the bust inevitable.
This is what we have again, yeah.
Well, partly, yes. So we'll get to that. So this is what you have this,
Debt now is the problem, right?
right.
Yeah.
So we've
done
entered
more
a
than
phase
debt.
change.
We've done
since
more
then.
than debt. Yeah, this is great, Joe.
So this is what happens. Everybody has to go get their gold. Everybody goes and tries to get their gold because they owe debt, but they can't pay it. So everybody goes and tries to get a gold. Do I have anybody's gold at this point?
Not everybody's.
Not everybody's.
Only one.
So either some people get all their gold or all the people get some of their gold. But I don't have enough to go around. Now, this system should have been outlawed because it's fraud. But instead they looked at this and they said, and let me explain why it's fraud. I've promised to give you your gold at any time you come and ask. It says pay to the bearer on demand. If I can't honor that obligation, that's fraud. That's a contract. It doesn't matter if I wasn't expecting everybody to ask for it at once. That's fraud. Instead of outlawing it, does anybody know what this building is? Close. This is the Bank of England. Same thing. Their central bank. The Federal Reserve is our central bank. So instead of outlawing it, they nationalized it and said the problem isn't that we were committing fraud. The problem is it wasn't big enough. We didn't do it at scale. We need to have a bank for the banks so that if a bank run happens, the bank can just get gold from the bank for the other banks. So that's what a central bank is. It's the bank for the other banks. So that if a bank run happens, nobody will know. They can just get their gold from the central bank. The problem is you can't eliminate risk. You can only transfer risk. So if we all go to somewhere that has a big cliff, let's say we go to the Grand Canyon and we all step to the edge of the Grand Canyon and I slip off and I fall down to my death. What is everybody going to do at that moment? Everybody's going to step back and be like, whoa, that's a little bit unsafe. I need to step back. Now, instead, let's imagine we're all standing on the edge and we're all holding a rope together. If I slip, you guys are going to still hold on to the rope and you'll be able to pull me back so I won't fall. So do I have any individual risk of falling anymore?
No.
No, because you guys will bail me out. You'll pull the rope back. Do you have any risk of falling? Do you have any risk of falling? Nobody has any individual risk of falling. So nobody has any incentive to step away from the cliff. But what happens if 4 of us fall at the exact same time? Everybody goes because we're all holding on to the same rope. So everybody goes. So when you eliminate the risk of individual failure, all it does is transfers all that risk to the system, and individuals stop failing for a little while, but the risk builds and then the entire system collapses. So the Federal Reserve, this is the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve started in 1913. 7 years later, we had the first Great Depression in 1920, 1921. If you haven't heard about it, read a book by Jim Grant called The Forgotten Depression. And that was called the Great Depression at the time until just 9 years after that. We had another one that was even worse. And that one was called the Great Depression since then. And that was within 7 years of the first time of creating the central bank in the United States, after we had 40 years of wealth creation, wages declining, but real wages growing and getting more for less. So we centralized it, we nationalized it with a central bank. And everybody in the world did this. It wasn't just the United States. Everybody in the world around 300 to 200 years ago started practicing and playing with the idea of opening up a central bank and using that. We saw many collapses, but the biggest one that happened all at once was when everybody realized, the governments realized, we can use this to fund war. Because the bank before, remember, I can lend out gold, right? So I have unlimited spending power until everybody catches on. So governments use their central banks to have unlimited spending power to further these massive wars in World War II, and they depleted their entire nation's wealth. And so after that big collapse, what happened was we looked around and we said, the problem wasn't, oh, well, first, this is, does anybody know what these kids are playing with? Yeah, these are blocks of cash.
Is that Germany's money?
This is the Weimar Republic in Germany. So this is a symptom of inflationary financing where you print money in order to finance your government spending. Eventually, the money becomes so worthless that might as well just let the kids play with it because you can't even buy a loaf of bread with it. So after that collapse, the rest of the world had no gold left. The United States was the only one that had gold. And so the rest of the world said, we don't want to learn from our mistakes. The problem wasn't that we nationalized it and committed the fraud at a national scale. The problem is it wasn't big enough. So this is the Bretton Woods meeting where the entire world pegged their currencies to the dollar because the dollar was still pegged to gold. So this is now, we went from gold to a gold standard. Now we're at a gold exchange standard where we globalized the fraud, where we globalized the fractional reserve banking system, where now no longer you've got the Federal Reserve over the American banks, the Bank of England over the British banks, you've got every central bank over their own banks. Now you've got the Federal Reserve over every central bank, and then every central bank over their banks, and every bank over the individual's money. So instead of getting rid of it, outlawing it, saying this is a bad idea, we scaled it up even more. But what do we know about risk? You can't eliminate risk, you can only transfer it. And so when you transfer that risk to the entire system, it's going to make the entire system a lot more fragile. And now it's global instead of just national. So this happened in 45. We know what happened about 30 years later. The United States Federal Reserve printed way more money. They lent out more gold than they had in the vaults. The rest of the world caught on and they said, hey, we don't think there's enough gold. The United States has been sending out a lot more of these paper notes that say we'll pay to the bearer on demand, dollars and gold. We think they've been sending out a lot more than they actually have gold. So the rest of the world started to go turn in their dollars. All the central banks around the world, they said, hey, you promised America that if we gave you dollars, you'd give us gold in return. So they all started to go redeem that promise. Did we have enough gold? No, not even close. We were 2 weeks away from completely running out of gold when this guy said, nah, we're going to keep the rest. I think it was France, it might have been Spain, actually at that point sent a warship to New York to collect their gold after we had closed the gold window. They were the only ones that got their gold. So we didn't solve the problem by nationalizing it. We didn't solve the problem by globalizing it. And it's the exact same thing that was happening in the beginning, where the gold was the money, the supply of money. It was the foundation. The banks lent new money into existence on top of that, caused a massive run up in prices, and then a big bust in the inevitable collapse. The problem is at that point, we entered a phase change. So we started off as gold as money. Then we moved to gold standard, where you have paper redeemable for money. Now, this is like a little in between. You see, it says we'll pay to the bearer on demand $5. It used to say $5 in gold coin. Then it moved to we'll pay to the bearer on demand $5 because they're like, oh, everybody understands $5 is gold, obviously, so we don't have to say in gold. And then, in God we trust. So that was the evolution that the monetary system went through until we got to the 70s, where we had this phase change, where now you don't have the supply of money fixed to anything with constraints other than law. So the laws were in place about how the monetary system worked because that money was fixed to gold. Maybe it was at a fraudulent rate, 40%, 10%, whatever the reserve ratio was, but there were some constraints to the creation of money. Since then, this is a picture of Zimbabwe a few years ago, taking a wheelbarrow full of cash to buy a loaf of bread. We've had more instances of hyperinflation in the world since 1970 than we had in all of history prior to that. Because now the only restraints on the creation of new money, the expansion of the money supply, are laws that exist as relics of a system when money was tied to a commodity. And this is a phase change that we went through where the money supply has been able to grow extremely quickly since then. Now, in the United States, we haven't seen wheelbarrows of cash to go buy goods, but we do see things like this all the time, especially over the last couple of years. If you notice the weight on these pasta boxes, the top one is 554 grams, the bottom one is 410 grams. And so the total amount of pasta in the box went down, the price stayed the same, or now it's probably a little bit higher. So people call this shrinkflation. It's just another word for, that's just a strategy to hide the inflation that's really there. You get less for more. Deflation was getting more for less. Inflation is getting less for more. It costs you more to get less. So that's what we've been experiencing recently. And again, this is because we no longer have any restraints on the creation or the expansion of the money supply. The United States has printed a lot of money over the last 50 years or so. The money supply has grown extremely quickly, especially recently. And we have not seen the wheelbarrows full of cash here yet. So the question is why? Why have some places seen it and other places haven't? Right now, we've got an escape valve. This is a pressure release, let's say. Our money is not stuck in the United States. Whereas Zimbabwe, nobody else really wanted to use their money. In Weimar Germany, at a certain point, nobody else was really taking their money. In Venezuela, a couple years ago, nobody else was really taking their money. So all the money that they printed was going into their own economy. So they felt all the effects of it. We've got a pressure release valve. The Bretton Woods Agreement. You guys remember what we showed, that black and white picture where everybody said we'll peg our currency to the dollar because the dollar is pegged to gold. 1970, that broke and they said, we're not going to give you gold anymore. The rest of the world, did they stop using the dollar at that point? No, they just kept on using it. The system was in place. The infrastructure was in place. Everybody just said, screw it. We're going to keep on using the dollar. That's why the dollar is today still the global reserve currency. And when you're a country like Russia that gets locked out of being able to use dollars, it really hurts your economy. When you're a country like Iran that got locked out of using dollars, it really hurts your economy because you can't get dollars to give it to another country to get what you need from that country. So the rest of the world still uses dollars. So a lot of the dollars that come into existence, does anybody know what the twin deficits are?
The twin deficits?
Yeah. The twin deficits, we've got two deficits, structural deficits here in the United States. One of them is a budget deficit. Has anybody ever had a month where you have a budget deficit?
Yes.
Yeah, a little bit more month left at the end of the paycheck, right? So you have some go on the credit card or you pull from savings. That means you spent more than you made that month. That's a budget deficit. America has had budget deficits every single year for decades. Minus I think there was one, maybe 2 years in 2000, 1999, somewhere around there where we had a slight budget surplus. Other than that, we're always running a budget deficit. So that's deficit number one. What's the other deficit? The other deficit is a trade deficit. So we buy more from the rest of the world than they buy from us. So if you add up everything we buy from China and India and Africa and everywhere around the world, Indonesia, Canada, Mexico, everywhere, we send out a lot more money and get a lot more stuff compared to all the stuff that we make and send out to everybody else. So we have those twin deficits. When I talk about a pressure release valve, we send a lot of dollars to China because we buy a lot of stuff from China. So they make stuff, they send that stuff over here and we send dollars over there. So when we print dollars, we're not keeping it all of ourselves. A lot of it is going overseas. Does anybody know what this chart is? This is the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. So we talked about what the Federal Reserve is the central bank. That's the bank above the other banks. This is their balance sheet. So they own $9 trillion worth of stuff. Does anybody know what the Federal Reserve owns? What is that stuff that they own? What are those assets?
Are they bonds?
Yes. Most of them are US government treasuries, bonds that the United States government has created. The United States government said, hey, we need to borrow money because remember our first deficit was a budget deficit. Well, we don't have savings. The federal government does not have savings, right? We're spending more money than they're making in taxes. And so they have to borrow the difference. Just like if you or I did that, we'd have to swipe the credit card. We have to borrow the difference. So the federal government has had to do that. This is the, I wonder if is that blocking that? The top of the
I
chart.
can move that out of the way.
Yeah.
Let me move that.
Okay. This is the federal debt. Oh, this is as a percent of GDP. Let me go to the next one. Okay. So this one is the total federal debt. This is the national debt. We just hit $30 trillion recently. So over the course of America's life, the government's life, it has continued to borrow, put money on the credit card, pulls money in from taxes, and then spends a little bit more. It makes up the difference by borrowing. It has accumulated $30 trillion worth of borrowed dollars. We go back to this chart. This is the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. It is $9 trillion just about. About $7 trillion worth of this is the federal government's debt. So the federal government owes $30 trillion. The Federal Reserve has about $7 trillion worth of that debt on its balance sheet. So just to make this clear, just to make sure, because Federal Reserve, federal government sounds similar, they're different. Federal Reserve is the central bank. Just think of it as a bank. It's a bank. It has a monopoly on the creation of dollars. And so our government says, hey, we need to borrow money because we want to spend more than we can actually take in taxes. And so it says, does anybody want to lend us money? So some people will lend the government money. My Aunt Sally might lend the government some money because she says, hey, it's safe. They can always pay it back to me because they can always tax more or print more to get to me. So it's safe. So my Aunt Sally might loan $1,000 to the government. That's not enough. They need a lot more than that to make up their budget deficit. So we go to the bank, Federal Reserve, the central bank, and they say, we're just going to print new money into existence. We're going to loan that to the government, and the government is going to owe that money back to the central bank in terms of about $7 trillion as of right now. The rest of the balance sheet is about $2.5 trillion worth of mortgage-backed securities. Everybody remember the financial crisis, housing market blows up, all the banks had a lot of mortgages that were put together into these securitized products where one product had a bunch of different mortgages in it, and all the mortgages started to fail, so these products weren't worth anything anymore. The Federal Reserve said, we'll buy those at full price even though they're worthless to make sure that the banks don't go under. And so they bought a bunch of those and they're sitting on their balance sheet. So as your mortgages are getting paid off, that money is going to the central bank, the Federal Reserve. Okay. So this is the national debt. Like I said, the federal government has spent $30 trillion in excess of what it's been able to bring in terms of taxes. And you might look at that and think, okay, well, that's a lot. That sounds like a lot, but is that actually a lot historically? Because the wealth has grown a lot in the United States, right? Especially over the last couple of decades, we've increased our wealth a lot. Wealth is measured by GDP, gross domestic product. This is a chart of the federal government's debt as compared to our GDP. So you can see here that for a long time, our debt to GDP ratio was under 65. So the total debt that the federal government owed was worth about 65% of the total national GDP. Right now, it's sitting at over 120. And earlier on in 2020, it spiked over 130. That means that if you couldn't actually do this, but if you sold everything that the United States owns, the entire wealth pool of the United States, it would get 100%. You use that to pay off the national debt, you'd still have 20% of the debt left over. So there's not even, like, the total GDP is worth less than the national debt. That's what this number means. All right, so we've entered into this system, like I said, where we have a phase change. We don't have the ability to, or any constraints on the creation of money, right? So we're not tied to any constraints on expanding the money supply. When the money supply grows, think back to our desert island example, when the money supply grows very quickly, what happens to prices? They go way up. This is the opposite of the desert island, because in the desert island, the money supply stayed the same and the wealth pool grew. Right now, the money supply is growing fast and the wealth pool can't keep up. So prices are going up. The way that that works out in practice is that prices are an auction system. We understand that prices are, that value is subjective, right? And we understand that value is ordinal. And so when people get money, they're going to go spend it on something, right? Prices are an auction system, though. It's a giant, complex auction system where the value of everything is being determined by every single person's subjective values and wants as they go and make decisions every single moment of every single day on what they want more than everything else. And so when you look at the price of the new Mac Studio that just came out, and see that if you max it out and get all the great upgrades inside, it'll cost $8,000. You look at that and you say, or I could buy the new the MacBook Air that came out last year and spend $1,500 or $1,800 on that. You might look at that and say, my subjective values and wants The MacBook Air is more valuable to me because then I get to keep more money. So that's an example of how every single decision we make all throughout the day, throughout our lives, is looking for where to maximize our own value the most. So prices are an auction system that will constantly be responding to the movements of everybody's subjective values and wants throughout the day, throughout the year. As I'm the government, let's say, I'm going to print $1 trillion. Where does that money go to? If I'm going to tell, well, the Federal Reserve is the one that prints the money. So if I, as the federal government, if I want to spend $1 trillion, first I have to say, can I borrow some money from somebody? Everybody says maybe. And then the Federal Reserve says you can borrow the rest from us, and they print it into existence. So again, this is a system built on relics of a gold standard, because the federal government, if they wanted to, they could write a law, pass a law that just says they take control of the money printer. But that would have a lot of public backlash. And so they just keep this system in place because it does the same thing as them controlling the money printer, even though it looks like debt. Is this $30 trillion ever going to get repaid?
Probably not.
Definitely not. $30 trillion is, like I said, 130% of our, 120% of our GDP. And it's still growing because just the debt service cost is growing faster than they can make it decrease. So if you have has anybody ever done a credit card with a 0% APR intro rate? It's not very fun when you get to the end of that and suddenly it's 10, 15, 20%. So maybe if you've gotten yourself into a bad position, you get to the end of that year and you do a balance transfer to a new credit card with a 0% rate, and you get another 6 months or another year. And then you've loaded up that one a little bit more because you don't have to make big payments on it. So that one grows a little bit more. And then you get to the end of that and you're like, well, I can't afford 20%. So then you do a balance transfer again. That's what the federal government has done. Their debt has been growing. Their debt service costs have been growing. So as the debt needs to get paid off, all they're doing is borrowing new debt to pay off the old debt. And that's why their total debt load is growing. So I'm the federal government. I want to spend more. I borrow, but I can't borrow from you guys because nobody wants to loan me $1 trillion. So I go to the money printer and I say, hey, money printer, print some money, loan it to me. I'll pay you back when it's due by asking you for more to pay off the old one. So they spend the money then into existence. When the federal government spends that money, where does it go? Let's look at the last big spending by the federal government.
Different bills, grants, all kinds of stuff, right? Programs, Build Back
Yeah.
Better.
Yep, so it goes to the
Checks into
NGOs,
Checks into our bank account.
checks into people's bank accounts.
Child credit.
Yep, it goes to military contractors, goes to Social Security, Medicare, healthcare companies, goes to politicians' paychecks, right? So the government doesn't just keep all that money in its own separate bank account. If it printed $10 trillion and then set it on Mars, would that do anything to the money supply? No. So the money supply grows not by the printing of money, but by the injection of that money into the system. So the federal government spends $1 trillion into existence. It goes into military contractors, the companies, goes to organizations, goes to people's paychecks. What do those people then do with that new money that they get? Do they keep it or do they spend it on something? They spend it on something. If you're rich, you've got all of your needs covered, you've got more money than you need, and you get a massive influx of cash. What's the most likely thing you're going to do with that cash?
You're gonna either invest it or save it.
Yes, you're going to either invest it or save it. Most of the time these days, corporations, I don't have the chart, but the chart of corporate debt in America over this same time period looks exactly like this. So corporate debt has exploded just like the national debt. And so corporations aren't saving their money. Individuals aren't saving their money. If you look at the chart of household debt, looks again just like this over the same time period. People aren't saving their money. Corporations aren't saving their money. They're spending it or they're investing it. If you're rich, you're going to invest it because you're not going to go buy more groceries. If you have $10 million, you're already buying all the groceries you need. You're not going to buy more groceries when you get an extra million. You're going to go buy a couple businesses. You're going to go buy a couple rental properties. You're going to go put it in the stock market. You're going to invest it. What was the first thing we saw in 2020 after the money was printed in terms of prices? What prices reacted quickest? I wonder if I have the chart.
Like which prices went down the quickest?
After prices had gone down in the initial
Oh,
crash,
which ones came up?
did groceries go up first or did stocks go up first? Stocks exploded higher
Yeah.
because all the new money went into the hands of the people first that didn't need it, and that money went and was invested. Eventually, money started getting out to people, individuals, through stimulus checks. How does anybody know how big the difference between the bill was versus the stimulus checks per person?
It wasn't the same?
So it was about 10 to 1. So for every $1,000 that an individual got in terms of stimulus money, there was about $10,000 spent in other ways by the government. Now, when the government spends money, again, some of it, that $1,000 went to individuals, but the majority of it went into people's accounts and business accounts, right? So that money gets invested, that money gets spent. But when a corporation then invests, that money goes to somebody else who receives that money, who then goes and spends that money on something else. And then that person gets that new money and they go spend that money on something else. We said prices are an auction system, right? Where everybody's trying to determine what they want throughout the day, throughout the year. As that new money works its way throughout the system, getting passed from one person to the next, everybody's looking at it and saying, I need to go spend this on something, whether it's groceries or assets. And with the new money entering the system, with a constant flood of money entering the system, it's a rising tide, lifts all boats. Prices at first of assets rise, and then that works its way throughout the system and prices of goods and services start to rise as well. So by the time that the average person gets their hands on the new money, prices have already gone up. And even though wages over 2021 through 2022, January and February went up 7 to 8%, wages only rose 5 to 7%. So everybody got a 5% raise, a 7% raise, but your cost of living went up 8%. Everybody in real terms got a pay cut. Remember from 1860 to 1910, everybody got pay cuts, but in real terms, they got pay raises because cost of living went cheaper. We're experiencing the exact opposite right now because the supply of money is growing at the quickest pace ever because they're loaning money into existence, but it's not a loan because it'll never be repaid, and they're just using the money printer at the Federal Reserve to create new money. So now we're entering into a topic that you guys are probably going to know more about than I am. And so I'm going to give a brief intro to this transition phase, and then we'll do like a question and answer type of interaction here. Right now, it looks like we're entering a phase change. I had a picture up here of Putin and Xi, and we're experiencing globally a de-dollarization right now, where the world does not want to use dollars anymore. We're sending a bunch of dollars to China. They're sending us stuff like consumable goods. What are they doing with those dollars? Does anybody know what China's been doing with dollars for the last?
Hoarding them and
Investing them
loaning
too
them
and
out
stuff.
to other people or no?
They've been investing them. So this is one way they've been investing them. This is the annual net purchases of gold in tons since 2010. In 2018, we see a big spike in the purchases of gold by central banks around the world. Does anybody know what happened in 2018 from the Federal Reserve? The Federal Reserve bailed out the economy in the great financial crisis. This entire time, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Bernanke, and then Janet Yellen was saying, we are going to decrease our balance sheet. We're going to take it back down to this level. So they bought a bunch of assets. They were saying, we're going to sell these assets back into the market at some point. Jerome Powell comes along, and he gets to the point, he says, we're actually going to do it. We're going to start selling these assets. So they start doing it. The market, the stock market, could not handle it. The stock market started to crash in 2018. And I don't have the chart on here, but if you look at interest rates at the end of 2018 in December, the market started to crash. That's when Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Chairman, said, we're not going to increase interest rates anymore. We're going to stop. Only 9 months later, this is September of 2019, the market couldn't handle it again. There's a market called the repo market that we won't get into, blew up, and they had to start buying assets again, right here. So during this time frame, 2018, 2019, the rest of the world realized the Federal Reserve will never sell their assets. This bailout's not temporary, and we have inflationary financing moving forward into the future. So at that point, the central banks around the world started selling treasuries, getting rid of US debt for the first time. And now the Federal Reserve owns more US government debt than all other central banks in the world combined. That wasn't true even 5 years ago. The rest of the world has been de-dollarizing, and we've seen agreements between countries like China and Russia on how to get energy and goods and services to each other without using dollars. We've seen they just came up with a new gas deal that's denominated in euros so that neither one of them can control the currency. We're seeing new relationships and agreements and talks of systems to use currencies other than the dollar all around the world right now. And especially, regardless of how you feel about what America is doing to Russia right now, whether you think that's a great thing, not a great thing, the rest of the world is looking at that and saying, I like that they're doing it to Russia, or maybe they're saying, I don't like that the United States is doing that to Russia, but the rest of the world is saying, regardless, I don't want to ever be subject to that myself. So China might be looking and saying, hey, great thing, US, keep on sanctioning Russia. Meanwhile, we're going to get rid of our dollars so that you can never do that to us when we want to go after Taiwan. So we're seeing a global push for de-dollarization right now, which is leading us to a phase change where the rest of the world is saying, we're not going to want to use dollars forever. Now, if you look at individuals, especially people in the younger demographic, are starting to look and say, I can't afford to go buy groceries anymore. My wages are not keeping pace with groceries. I can't afford gas right now. I can't afford whatever it is. Prices are going up. And more people than ever are talking about the Federal Reserve, the central bank. People know Jerome Powell by name more than people knew Bernanke, people knew Greenspan. Nobody knew what the Federal Reserve was 20 years ago. And now that we have all this financial chaos and prices exploding, people are starting to wake up and realize there's something fundamentally wrong about the monetary system. And that's the fact that we have no constraints on the creation of new money. They're funding all their government, all the finances, funding all of their spending through the creation of new money and the expansion of the money supply. That's causing prices to react upwards for every reason that we've already talked about. So some people are now looking and saying, we need a new monetary system that nobody can control. And so Bitcoin was one of the solutions that is being proposed right now that a lot of people think will soon be base money. Now, quick primer, because you guys, like I said, probably know more about Bitcoin than I do. When you look back at history, there are other examples of public ledger monetary systems. Has anybody ever read the Bitcoin Standard by Saifuddin Ammous? So there's a island, and it's, I can't remember the island, the people. It's not, I can't remember the name of the people. There's an island that used these giant stones as money. They looked like big donuts. They were made out of stone. And so you couldn't just take this and say, hey, I'm going to buy a cow. I'm going to take this big rock and give it to you. The ownership of the stone, of this giant rock, was a matter of public memory. And so if I own 50% of this rock, the entire community on the island recognizes that I own 50% of this rock. So there is no ability for me to steal it from somebody else, because if I said, hey, I own 100% of this rock, everybody would be like, no, you don't. We all remember you only own 50% of it. So anytime a transaction happened, if I wanted to buy a cow, I'd take my half of the rock and I'd say, I'm going to give my ownership of this half of this rock to you for this cow. Everybody would agree, and now ownership of this rock would transfer to you, and I would have a cow. This is a public ledger. That's all it is. It's like a giant billboard at all times that says, these are the people that have all of the specific amounts of money. And we have a record back to the beginning of where each of these people got their money from and where they got their money from before that and where that money came from before that. That's all Bitcoin is. You can look at the blockchain and see from the Genesis block, every transaction that has happened and every single wallet that any fraction of Bitcoin has ever been associated with up until now. It's just a matter of public memory that anybody can go and see who has all the money. We also know the monetary policy side of Bitcoin, right? What's the inflation rate of Bitcoin right now? What is it 1.2?
Like how many Bitcoin are they creating year
Per
over
year.
year?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's 1.2.
1.2%. Does anybody remember what the inflation rate of gold was throughout history? 1.5, maybe 2 during some years when there was a lot of gold digging happening, the gold rush, something like that. So does anybody know what happens to the inflation rate of Bitcoin over time?
It's gonna decrease.
It decreases. Every 4 years, there's the halvening, the number of Bitcoins that are released gets cut in half. And so the next one is in 3 years or so. And so the inflation rate won't be 1.2% anymore. It'll be, 0.7% or whatever it is.
1.72.
1.72 right now?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So every 4 years, the number of Bitcoins that are being released into the system gets cut in half. And so the inflationary policy, the inflation rate of Bitcoin decreases over time. So it used to be a lot. Now it's getting lower and lower and lower and lower. What would happen to the prices of goods and services if suddenly everything overnight, everybody was required, everybody in the world used Bitcoin? What would start happening to prices? Remember our desert island example, fixed supply of money or money supply that grows very, very, very slowly. What happens to prices? Do they go up or go down? They go down. It's a deflationary monetary policy. The money supply stays the same. Are the goods and services, the total pool of wealth in the world, is it growing or declining? It's growing over time. We might have peaks and valleys, we might have volatility, but over time, people become more efficient. We develop new ways of doing things. We offload human labor. Maybe there's a big revolution in AI coming soon where we offload a lot of human labor from things like doctors and lawyers and judges and high mental capacity things, shifting that, offloading that labor to computers that can do that better. We offload a lot of human labor and have a giant increase in productivity system-wide. And we have a massive leap forward in terms of the total pool of wealth, the total pool of goods and services. But if everybody's using Bitcoin, is the total supply of money staying the same or growing really quickly along with all the stuff?
Staying relatively the same, yeah.
Staying relatively the same number of Bitcoins exist. They grow a little bit, 1.5% per year. So in that situation, the currency, the money, grows more valuable relative to all the stuff because stuff is getting cheaper. You're getting more stuff with the same amount of money, whether you're talking about the whole pool or just a fraction of it. So the money gets more valuable relative to all the stuff. And so that's why a lot of people are wanting to move to a system that is the same thing as all the old guys you talk to. They say we need to go back to a gold standard. All the young guys you talk to will say you need to go to a Bitcoin standard. They're saying the same things. We need some sort of restraint on the creation of money, and a money that is not controlled by an entity that has a monopoly on violence so that they can't force us to use it. And if everybody uses a monetary system that has a fixed supply that can't grow just on someone's will, then what's the only way to get your hands on money? Remember in the original example, if I want to get your money on the island, what's the only way I can get money from you?
I have to trade for something, yeah.
You have to give me money for what?
Oh, for something that for commodity.
Yeah, for something you want. So the only way to get more money is to provide value to society. And the only way to provide value to society, the only way to know whether you're providing value is not, I think it's valuable, it's whether you're willing to give me money for it or not. Then there's somebody who subjectively values what I have to offer. Right now, if you're the government and you want more money, do you have to provide value to society? No, you just borrow from the printer. If you are a government contractor, do you have to provide value to society to get your hands on more money? No, you just got to be buddies with the one guy who's going to swing the vote in your favor and get the deal, right? So in order to get your hands on new money in the current system, the money can be created out of nothing, and whoever's closest to the printer gets to spend that money first. They get to buy assets and goods and services before the prices react upwards, and they get wealthy as a result, which is a wealth transfer from everybody to the few. In a system where money can't be created at will and is not controlled by an entity, any entity, especially one with a monopoly on violence, the only way to get your hands on more money is to provide value to somebody else who has money which means that you're creating something of value, you're creating products, you're creating a good service, you're increasing the total pool of wealth. And so in a deflationary system, even though prices are falling down, your real wealth is growing over time because everybody is forced to do something that is providing a value to society. So the total pool of wealth has to grow, and people everywhere get wealthier as a result. And so we are looking at a phase change where the world is de-dollarizing, but we don't know whether it's going to go back to gold. We don't know whether it's going to go forward into a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. We don't know whether it's going to be a mashup of the two, or this last one, CBDC, before we move into question and answers and discussion time. Have you guys talked a lot about central bank digital currencies at all?
I mentioned it last week, but we haven't talked about it.
Okay, all right. So we talked about Bitcoin, and I'll use that as a kind of a mirror image. Bitcoin, is it a public ledger or a private ledger?
Public.
Public. Anybody can run a node. Anybody can look back at the entire blockchain and see where all the money came from and where it went. Is it anonymous or pseudonymous or fully information?
Like, can you be transparent? Like, can you be, can you have a pseudonym on there that represents yourself, or is it transparent who sent money to?
Yeah, so I guess it's a bad question. When you look at the blockchain for Bitcoin, are you able to see the names and personal information of the people who are trading Bitcoin back and forth? No. Is it fully anonymous? No. That's why people are getting cracked left and right for using Bitcoin for crimes, because it's a blockchain, it's a public ledger. I can see the money went here, but I can also see where it came from before that, where it came from before that. I can track IP addresses, and if I'm the government with unlimited resources because I've got a money printer, I can find exactly who spent that money. But it's pseudonymous because it's not my name, it's not my social security, it's not my birth date that's trading the money. It's a wallet address. So the average person isn't going to be looking on there and being able to know who has the money and who doesn't and where it went. So we know that Bitcoin is a public ledger, but it's pseudonymous. Is the monetary policy, meaning the inflation rate, is it already built in and locked in, or can it be changed by somebody at will? For Bitcoin, it's locked in. Goes down by half every 4 years, the halvening. Is this total supply of Bitcoin locked in, or can that be changed?
Locked in.
Locked in. And then, so those are the big ones. A central bank digital currency. We're going to see over the coming 2 years a big push all around the world for central bank digital currencies, and they're going to use this as, they're going to probably use stable coins as a little bit of a Trojan horse into using central bank digital currencies. And they're also going to be sliding it in to the crypto ecosystem as a way to get people used to using it. Right. A central bank digital currency, though, is not a cryptocurrency. It is not, I mean, technically it is, but the differences are so severe that I like to put it in a category of its own. So just by guess, do you think a central bank digital currency is a public ledger or a private ledger?
Private, because it's Fed managed.
Right, it's a private ledger. So Bitcoin is public, CBDC is private. Do you think it's your personal information associated with it, or do you think it's anonymous?
No, definitely personal information.
Personal information. Has anybody opened up a brokerage account, like a stock trading account before? Has anybody opened up a bank account?
KYC.
KYC, you've got to put in your name, your birthday, your date of birth, your social security number, all your information, because especially after the Patriot Act in 2001, we have a system where banks are forced to get every single piece of information on you so that they know exactly who you are, what money you're trading, and where it's going for money laundering purposes and anti-terrorism. So the central bank digital currency will be the exact same thing, but just scaled up. So instead of you opening up your account with Chase or Bank of America or Wells Fargo, if you hate yourself, you're going to open up your wallet at the central bank, the Federal Reserve. So right now you've got a bank account with all the banks, right? What did I say about the central bank? It's a bank above all the banks. So a central bank digital currency is just a bank account that bypasses the banking system. Instead of you having an account at your bank, you have an account directly with the central bank. Now, what are some use cases for this? Anybody have any guesses why that would be useful for a central bank to let everybody have an account with them?
Accountability.
Accountability, how so?
So they can see how people are spending or not spending, especially when it comes to tax dollars. They want to capture tax dollars so they can reinvest it in public infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. So if anybody is involved in a side hustle right now, lots of people over the last 2 years have started side hustles. People get paid on Venmo and Zelle and Cash App. And on there, when you get paid for something, you have the ability to check the box to say whether it's just personal, like you shared the dinner cost, or whether it's for business, like you sold something, that you got at a garage sale for free. And if in the course of the year you make over $600 on Zelle or Cash App or Venmo through that checkbox that says you did it for business, at the end of the year, that company, PayPal or whoever it is going to be required to send a 1099 to the IRS to say, hey, you actually made taxable income and the IRS is going to tax you on that, because that's always been the law, but they've never reported it before. So right now they're looking to crack down because they think there's a lot of people out there, individuals, who are getting money under the table through these apps and not reporting it. So if you have an account with a central bank digital currency, every single dollar that you spend is 100% tracked. Now, will you or I be able to see anything happening with the central bank digital currencies? No, not at all. So it's private. They're the only ones that are going to be able to see it, and they can see everything about it. What is the other thing that the central bank prints money for? Like, what's the main thing that they print money for that we talked about a lot? Who do they give the money to when they print the money?
The federal government.
Federal government, right? And then the federal government loans that money into existence, or spends that money, and they spend it on government contractors, into healthcare, all this. So we've got this system that is all these fences and loopholes that are, like I said, a relic from an old system. A central bank digital currency effectively brings together and meshes fiscal policy and monetary policy. The federal government spending money and the Federal Reserve creating the money. You can merge those two together. So instead of giving the IRS the requirement to mail out all these checks to every US citizen and then collect all this extra new tax data, instead of doing that, the Federal Reserve can just say, we're going to credit everybody's account $600 instantly. No manpower needed. What happens though if gas prices start to get too high and the Federal Reserve thinks people are hoarding gas, causing prices to skyrocket? They can just say, monthly quota, you can't spend more than $400 a month on gas. And anytime you go to swipe your card at a gas station, if you've met your limit, it won't go through until the next month. What if they say, hey, prices are crashing, we need a big boost to the economy right now, and we want to give everybody money, but we're afraid people are going to save it and not spend it. I'll just assign an expiration date to those dollars. So you have to spend them in a month or else they go away. And then you're, as a Federal Reserve, you're thinking, okay, but what if they buy stocks with it? Or what if they buy gold with it? Or what if they buy Bitcoin with it? Then it's not getting into the economy like we want it to. So we're going to shut those off and you can only spend it at grocery stores. Now you might say, okay, well, what if I want to go to the grocery store and spend my regular money, or I have Bitcoin and I want to transact with somebody, or I have gold, or I want to do, a business side hustle, something like that outside of the central bank digital currency. Well, at some point, not at first, but at some point, in order to have a business license, in order to not get nailed by the IRS, you're going to have a wallet with the Federal Reserve. You're not going to be legally allowed to do business without having a wallet at the Federal Reserve. So then when you go to buy something or sell something, you're going to be dealing with somebody who is required, who also has it. They're not going to have any ability to take your money unless you give them a central bank digital currency. So you're not going to have any ability to transact without being a part of this system, unless prior to it, you already had something outside and you're dealing with parallel market, black market. But the central bank digital currency is a way to manipulate the money supply at a fine-tuned level. Right now, when they manipulate the money supply, it's a sledgehammer approach. They borrow $1 trillion, they spend it all into the economy, and they just hope it works its way where it needs to go. And then you get these giant asset bubbles, you get major inequality, you get all these crazy things happening as a result of the sledgehammer approach. So their thinking is, if we can control exactly where the money goes, if we can look at this and say, hey, stocks are getting too expensive, nobody can buy stocks for the next month. If they're looking at this and saying, hey, there's not enough money going into this area, we're going to say, everybody gets new money, you can only spend it over there. We're going to say, hey, too much money is going over here, so we're just going to institute a live tax on it. So every time you spend money, it costs you a little bit extra to spend that money on it. So you get to do a merging of fiscal and monetary policy. Now, let's move into question and answers. The bright side about this is that it collapses under its own weight because it's basically totalitarian control over a complex system, which, because of a couple of reasons, you can't control complex systems from a centralized standpoint. They end up collapsing, and so it doesn't survive if we go full bore into a CBDC. So eventually we return, and the world always has, to some sort of sound money, which might be blockchain, might be commodity based, but in between there will be a lot of countries who try and do this, and it'll delay the inevitable. So
That was awesome. Let's give Joe a round of applause. Fire away with your questions.
yeah.
So my thoughts about this idea with a fixed supply of or decentralized monetary system is how it will affect like low income communities that don't have necessarily access to this limited supply, because then there's going to be the haves and has nots. And regardless, if you were to create value, it's like having the opportunity to create value.
Yeah.
So what alternative system could be an idea to introduce that will also create opportunity for economic mobility?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's actually the #1 reason pushed by mainstream economists to have a slightly inflationary monetary policy instead of a deflationary monetary policy. They say, what about the people who have no access to the money? You get a hoarding of the money, and you get an imbalance of the haves and the have-nots.
Like monopoly.
Right, exactly. So the first answer is that if we look empirically, not theoretically, if we look empirically at what happens to an inflationary monetary policy, somebody gets the new money first, right? Unless you were able to do a perfectly equitable distribution of the new money percentage-wise for everybody to get the new money at the same time, then nobody gets the money first, everybody gets it at the same time. But if that is able to happen, take a look at this pizza. How many slices are on this pizza?
8.
We got 8 slices on the pizza. The pizza, the actual food, represents the total pool of wealth, the stuff in the economy. The slices represents the number of currency units, the amount of money in the system. So this economy is worth 8 slices, $8. What happens if I take the slicer and I cut 8 more slices into it to make 16 slices here? How much is this economy worth? Is it worth 8 slices anymore? No, it's worth 16 slices. But you need 2 slices now to make up the same amount of pizza as you only used to need 1 slice to make up the same amount of pizza. So did the total pool of wealth grow? No. It's just measured now by smaller units. So the wealth stayed the same, the slices, the number of slices grew, you have the same pool of wealth. In this example, if everybody gets their slice of pizza and then cuts it in half, there's 0 change to anybody. Nobody gets wealthier, nobody gets poorer. So in a system, if they could distribute a bunch of new money equally to everybody at the exact same time, everything would, let's say, double in prices, but everybody has twice the money. So nobody is any worse off, nobody is any better off. There's 0 change. So the point of an inflationary monetary system is to distribute some of the money to other people first, so that you get a wealth transfer in a way that the policymakers think is beneficial to everybody. Take the example of this pizza though. Now, if I want just 1 extra slice, I don't need 8 extra slices, I just need 1 extra slice. So I go to each slice and I slice off a tiny shaving from each slice, And now I have 9 slices, 1 new one, and all the same old 8 ones that are just a little bit less. Now I can take that 1 slice and I can give it to somebody. So now I can say, there are 9 slices of pizza. I created an extra slice of pizza. And I only took such a small amount from each of you that you barely even noticed. So it looks like I created wealth, when in fact, it was a wealth transfer, albeit small, a wealth transfer from the entire system to make the appearance of creating new wealth. And so that is exactly what happens when they print money and give it to some people first. That new money only has purchasing power as a percentage of all the existing money that came before. So when you print money and hand it out to certain people, it's a wealth transfer from the people who didn't get the money first to the people who did get the money first. Now we know that in these systems, empirically speaking, I'm not saying ideally if we could say, somebody with perfect morals and perfect information and perfect power is in control of the system, but in the systems that we can observe throughout history for hundreds of years, that's when corruption enters the scene. So that money, maybe not all of it, but a good amount of it goes to people who don't need it, who are closest to the producers of the money. And the wealth transfer still takes place from everybody else to the people who are well connected, or to the people who are rich, the people who get the money first. Now, if we take a look back at the other system in a gold-based monetary system, like the original example, nobody can create new money without providing value. So let's say I have, today, we're using gold as money, so the money supply cannot grow. Let's say I work at McDonald's and I make $10 an hour. This year, that's barely enough to survive. I live with tons of roommates. I walk to work. I don't have any expenses that are not absolutely necessary, and I'm struggling to survive. I make $10 an hour. Next year, the money supply hasn't changed at all. What happens to prices when the money supply doesn't change?
Go down.
They go down. It's deflationary. So I make $10 an hour. Oh my gosh, I've got 10 cents extra this year per hour. So I'm just going to put that away, or I'm going to buy a little bit extra to improve my quality of life. I'm going to buy a little bit healthier food, or I'm going to put some of it in a savings account. Maybe after that first year, I've only been able to save $500 after the entire year. The following year, what happened to prices? They went down again, a little bit more. So now I can afford even more. I save a little bit more. I had $500 in the bank already, but prices went down. So that $500 increased in purchasing power. And so in a deflationary monetary system where the money supply can't change, people who are working, people who are saving, and people who are not spending are the ones who grow their wealth. In the inflationary monetary system, it's the opposite. So it's the people who borrow a lot and spend a lot who get richer. And if you're borrowing a lot and spending a lot, you're already rich and you have good credit, which means that wealth transfer goes from the people without to the people with more who need it the least. And that's the way the system works. In a deflationary system, it's the opposite. The wealth transfers the other way in this system to the savers, to the workers, and to the people who spend less and least. The money flows that way instead of up. And so does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah.
You mentioned a book when you first started talking about Bitcoin, and I didn't get the name of it.
It's the Bitcoin Standard by, I don't know how to spell his name, but it's Saifedean Ammous.
Okay,
I think.
thank you.
Yeah, I mentioned a lot of books. I don't remember what the other ones were.
You mentioned the forgotten.
Yes. The Forgotten Depression
Yeah.
by
Jim Grant.
James Grant.
Yeah.
And the death of the 5,000 years.
Yes, Debt, the First 5,000 Years by David Graeber.
I heard you read over 100 books a year. How do you do that?
Very carefully and very hard. I focus a lot on it. It's kind of a goal of mine because my wife reads a lot more than I do. So every year at the beginning of the year, I've started over the competition. I'm like, all right, this year I'm going to beat you. And then by about February or March, she's so far ahead of me that I just have to settle for 100. But one way that it's a habit you have to build up, but one way that I started was listening to audiobooks on my commute. If you look at the average length of a book, it's about 8 hours. And if you divide that out throughout the year, skipping 2 weeks, it's about, I think it's about 2 hours a day of reading. The average individual in America today, when you add up social media and TV and movies, spends about 3.5 to 4 hours doing social media, TV, and movies. So if the average person were to take half of that and read instead, they'd be able to read on average 100 books a year.
So you think the central bank digital currency will collapse under its own weight, but it might live a life, right?
Yeah.
It might live a life and it might last for a while.
Yeah.
What tips it to collapsing under its own weight? Or what do you, I mean, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but how do you foresee kind of that folding into the economy? How do you see it living synchronously with crypto maybe for a while? Do you see him doing away completely with physical dollars, the physical representation? How do you kind of see this coming out?
All right. So first of all, physical cash. There's very, very, very little physical cash in existence, and a lot of it is counterfeited anyway. And so that move away from physical cash in the United States will be relatively easy. You're not going to see the wheelbarrows full of cash for inflation. You're just going to, if we get hyperinflation here, if the rest of the world dumps dollars and they all come back, you're going to go to buy something and your limit for the day is going to be $100,000 to swipe your debit card. You're going to have $1 million in the bank and you're going to swipe your card for $200,000 purchase just for groceries. And it's going to hit your daily limit. It's going to say, oh, you can't use over $100,000 today. That's the daily limit. So that's the same thing as people going to the store with a wheelbarrow full of cash. And they get there and then the loaf of bread is worth 2 wheelbarrows now instead of 1. So getting rid of physical cash would be relatively easy. It's already mostly outlawed, especially with civil asset forfeiture and confiscation of cash at airports and things like that for checking on money laundering. And so it's very, very hard to move large amounts of cash today. And even digitally, it all goes through the eyes, people watching through the Patriot Act. And so it's very hard to move large amounts of dollars. So the infrastructure is kind of already there to do away with the cash. What looks like it'll start happening, and I could be completely wrong about this because nobody has a crystal ball, but what it looks like will happen is we'll start to develop parallel markets or black markets even. And you're going to have more and more of a push from, okay, next time we need a stimulus check, you have to just download this wallet app from the Federal Reserve and there'll be $1,000 in there waiting for you. And you can spend it wherever you want with anybody who has, a Federal Reserve wallet app themselves. So I can go to the grocery store because I know they have a wallet. I can go anywhere and spend that money. So that'll be the first way to get it out through like something like a stimulus check with a bonus, like, hey, if you want your free money, download the app. And then they'll just slowly ramp that up. And as it becomes more and more pervasive in everyday life, you'll have a lot of people who realize I don't want any part of that. And they'll be stocking up on Bitcoin, other cryptocurrencies, gold, silver, things to barter with outside. Every single time in history, you look at every example of hyperinflation or inflation, you have Weimar Republic in Germany, you have Venezuela, you have Argentina, you have Zimbabwe, you have all these examples in just the last couple of decades. You have all this inflationary money printing. You have the government locked down on something called financial repression. They try and force everybody to use it because what's really happening is wealth transfer from the people to the state because the state has become over leveraged and over indebted and they have to get out of it. So they try and wealth transfer through inflation. The financial repression never works. There's always ways that money leaks out. And right now, that way that wealth is leaking out is people stocking up on Bitcoin and gold and silver and things to barter with. And so if it gets to the point where everybody's required to use it for 100% of daily transactions in life, There will already be so many people that have so much wealth outside that system that you won't care if you can't move wealth in and out of the central bank digital currency and Bitcoin or central bank digital currency and gold. You won't care that you go to the gold dealer. Gold dealers are out of business. You can't use your CBDC to buy gold. You won't be able to use it potentially if laws change. You won't be able to go buy a gun with it. Gun dealers will go out of business. You won't be able to maybe go buy marijuana with it, or maybe you will. Maybe the laws will change the other way, but they'll be able to lock down what can and cannot be bought with the money. So the only way then to do anything outside of that is with wealth that's already outside that system. So if I want to mow your lawn for $10, but I don't want the government to know, I can't use the CBDC. So you've got some Bitcoin, you'll pay me some Bitcoin to mow your lawn, and then nobody knows about it. Or you'll pay me some gold or something like that.
Or some bread or some milk, or we go back to
Exactly.
commodity type stuff, right?
Exactly. So then the question is like, well, first of all, that happens everywhere. You have parallel markets and black markets emerge everywhere. Look at Lebanon right now, highest inflation rate in the world right now. Anything that's slightly connected to the government has official prices, and they're hurting really bad because they don't move as fast as the market is moving. And then anybody that's on the side doing little side hustles or local businesses, small businesses buying and selling things, black market stuff, they're able to preserve their wealth a little bit better because they're able to adjust their prices faster, and they're getting euros or dollars, sometimes gold, maybe sometimes Bitcoin, but they're not doing it with the lira or the pound. Now, how does it collapse under its own weight? Okay, so
Just people rise up eventually and don't take it, right, is what you're saying.
eventually people don't take it. Eventually everybody just says no. But the reason for that is because it starts to break and work, it starts to get worse and worse and worse. And the reason why it devolves is for three reasons. It's a complex system. If you've ever studied complex dynamics, complexity dynamics, you understand that one input in a complex system has cascading effects that are literally unpredictable without moving through them. So Stephen Wolfram, he's the guy who invented Wolfram Alpha, which became the engine that drives Siri. He developed basically a couple years ago his theory of everything, where you have small inputs that are simple equations. And when you run them through, repeating them over and over, it develops these very complex graphs and almost lifelike 3D images that look very similar to things that we find in nature. And his whole thing, if you read the paper, is about how the inputs that are underlying the foundation of the universe can be very simple while creating complexity that cannot be predicted ahead of time, because if you look at the way that these algorithms play out, you cannot predict what it's going to be ahead of time. The only way to see what it produces is to let the program run. And so the way that's how complex systems work is these feedback loops. They are by nature inherently unpredictable. The only way to see what happens is to let them actually play out. So in a complex system, if you're going to try and control it, even though it won't work, if you're going to try and control it, you have to do it from a centralized standpoint. Because I remember what I said about prices. Prices are they come about as an auction from everybody's individual needs and wants, and needs and wants are subjective. So value is subjective, and it's ordinal, not cardinal. And so you have this entire system where all prices are being determined by every individual node in the entire system making decisions and changes. So there's no way to get ahead of that and see what comes out on the other side of that, because that's the definition of a complex system. And so if you are going to try and control that, you can't do that from a distributed basis, because there's literally millions of decision makers that are subjective decision makers, nothing objective that you can imprint from the top down. But if you're going to try and control it, you have to do it somewhat from a centralized standpoint. So they're going to look at this from a centralized standpoint and try and control the economy, which is a complex system, through the central bank, through the issuance, and from the increase or decrease in the supply of money, and directing it through different parts of the system. They'll try and control it that way. In order to do this effectively, you need three things. Number one, you need perfect information. Because if I think the system needs more money right here to survive better, but in reality I was mistaken and it actually needed it over here, there will be a massive mistake that will have feedback effects, and it'll have cascading results that I can't predict that will result in worse instead of better. So I need perfect information. Number two, I need perfect power. Because if I know I have perfect information and I know the money needs to get here, but I don't have the power, I don't have the control to actually execute that. And because of how the system works, the money just ends up over here, same result, worse instead of better. So you need perfect information and perfect control. The third thing you need is perfect morals. Because if you're in control of the system and you have perfect information and perfect control, and you know your buddy needs a little bit of help this month, you cannot have any wavering on morality. You have to make the perfect decision that is best for every single individual and not have any bias whatsoever. So everybody's heard of Jesus, right? Jesus is called the King of Kings in the Bible, which is the idea of that is the ruler above all rules. And the reason for this is because you look at the three characteristics of Jesus. He's omnipotent, omniscient, and he's sinless, right? And so he knows everything. He's got perfect information. He has all the power. He's in control of everything, and he's perfect. He never makes a mistake. He never sins. He never does anything wrong. And so the idea of a ruler that can actually rule with in a way that works while being in control of everything is somebody who has the perfect information, has the perfect control, and has the perfect morals, which by definition is impossible for humans. And it's impossible for an AI, it's impossible for a computer system, because even if you have the most advanced AI in the world running the central bank digital currency, what is the information that it's lacking? How many coconuts do you want before you stop taking coconuts for dollars?
And it's programmed with bias.
And it's programmed with a bias. But let's say we could get around that and say, I'm going to train you to be able to learn in a way that is not guided by my bias. Nothing can, the only way to have all of the perfect information about every single decision maker in the system is to be the actual decision makers in the system. So that's not replaceable by something on top. You end up with the problem, Stephen Wolfram's problem about trying to predict how a complex system evolves with the simple inputs without actually living it out. And so that's why it collapses under its own weight, because no matter what, there's no such thing as perfect information from a decentralized complex system into a centralized source. Number two, there's no such thing as perfect control or perfect power, because by nature, that is totalitarian control. And there will always be a way out for individuals or people to do black market, parallel market stuff. So you don't have perfect control of your system. And the third thing is we're people, we don't have perfect morals. People are going to make biased decisions, incorrect decisions, or decisions in favor of one person or another. And so those are the three reasons why a system like a CBDC collapses under its own weight eventually, and why you've seen that happen with any totalitarian system throughout history eventually falls underneath its own weight.
So when does Jesus come back and make it all right?
Yeah, that's the question. Maybe that's how we get a CBDC. Jesus comes back and gives us a CBDC.
And then makes it all right. There you go.
Yeah, what's up?
How would it change if the CBDC was like a fixed monetary system, like a Bitcoin, or like they couldn't manipulate the currency at all? It was just,
Yeah.
Would that change it? I mean, I'm sure it would, but.
Yeah, well, it would essentially be like a country like El Salvador adopting Bitcoin as their money. So that's the shift. It's like, okay, we're going to make a CBDC, but it's going to have a fixed monetary supply. We're not going to have the control to change it. Maybe it's pseudonymous instead of anonymous, so we can't collect your data, make it all the things that people really, really want. Then you have competition, right? Because if you're basically recreating, this is the network effects of why nothing has even close to caught up to Bitcoin yet, is because if you're making something identical to Bitcoin, why not use Bitcoin? And the reason why you'd use Bitcoin instead of the thing that's identical to the Bitcoin is because of the network effects. It's like, why use MySpace when everybody's on Facebook? I'm going to use Facebook. Why use Instagram when why use Facebook when everybody's on Instagram now? I'm going to use Instagram. Why use, it's the network effects. And so Bitcoin, its genius was really in having the network effects is the payments network, and the fact that there's a currency tied into that. But it's the same reason why if you want to split dinner with somebody at the dinner table, there's a couple options. There's Cash App, there's Zelle, there's Venmo, and you're going to choose the one that everybody has. Because if you've got an iPhone and they have an Android, you're not going to be able to send an Apple Cash. And so then you have competition enter and you still have the potential for like parallel black markets to exist, number one. And then the last thing is the potential. So we saw the nationalization of the gold standard and then globalization of the gold standard. And the idea was, we don't have any control over how much gold we have. So we can't make more money because we can only we have to keep 40% gold in reserves. But if they were the ones that created those rules, they can change those rules. That's one of the reasons why I like Bitcoin over Ethereum, because it's like, yes, the monetary policy of Ethereum has gotten better over time, but the fact that they have the ability to change it is dangerous in and of itself. And if you have the incentive of a policymaker then to change it in a way that's beneficial for themselves and the ability to, the chances that it does over something like Bitcoin is way higher.
Yeah, Bitcoin does have some drawbacks, obviously.
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about, proof of work and its inconsistencies and latency and energy consumption and everything else, right? So it's not to say that something may not emerge that would be better than Bitcoin and be a stable token and a transactional system that people actually would use for transactions instead of just as store of value. And I think that's going to be the indicator, right? From a digital currency standpoint, separate from a CDBC on a true crypto blockchain based platform. I don't think Bitcoin has legs personally, because people cannot use it for transactions. It's not able to be an exchange of value. People won't, because it's so valuable, right? People won't exchange it. And I think because of the underlying economics of proof of work and its inherent energy consumption and cost and latency. But that's maybe a debate we could have another time. But you have a quick thought on that?
Yeah, I do actually. So a couple of thoughts on that. Number one, when we look at the gold-based monetary system, the gold gets really valuable, right? So you have to give it to the bank because you don't want to go spend that all at one time, because you don't want a horse today, you just want lunch. So in a deflationary monetary system, you need something that is divisible. So you might cut your gold coin in half, but then eventually you have to cut it in half again, and then eventually you have to cut it in half again. It's the opposite of what happens right now in an inflationary monetary system, where you have to keep on writing more zeros and zeros and zeros on the new bills that are being printed. Zimbabwe just had $1 trillion bill, or maybe it was $100 trillion bill. And people who are, some people who have escaped, they have like that framed like $100 trillion bill just as a reminder. You just have to keep on writing zeros, but it buys the same thing as $1 used to. So inflationary monetary system, you need it ultimately infinitely multipliable in terms of the number of zeros that come after the one. In a deflationary monetary system, the opposite happens. So you need infinitely divisible. So you need more and more fractions. So that's one thing that gives Bitcoin a really long runway, at least, is that it is infinitely divisible. One sat is like, you can't buy anything with one sat today. But eventually, if that, let's say Bitcoin does become money, eventually one sat will equal how much $1 equals today. And so then eventually after that, one sat will equal how much $10 equals today, and so forth.
Well, I don't think it's the fractionality as much as it's the way Bitcoin has the potential to increase in value. And people remember the dude that bought the Domino's pizza with his Bitcoin that's now worth $1 billion, right? So people remember a few years ago, oh no, I'm going to hoard my Bitcoin now. I'm not going to use it for transaction. I'm just using it as a store of value.
Yeah.
And that somewhat prevents it from becoming a transactional instrument.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up, because after you asked your question, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but after you asked your question, I got silent. Veronica. I got silent because I was trying to remember there was a third thing that I was going to say, and you just brought it up, is the money hoarding thing. What happens if somebody hoards all the money? And in a situation where you've got deflation, where your money gets more valuable over time, there's a big opportunity to hoard your money. So let's go back to the Monopoly example. Let's say you're playing Monopoly, and one person somehow is able to hoard all the money, except for, let's say, $1 is now in circulation.
Well, in the game, somebody's gonna go bankrupt, but in real life, the game doesn't end. So eventually prices have to plummet, right? Because the money supply dried up. So now that $1 has to be divisible, it has to represent all of the wealth, all the properties. So in a system like the classic example is like a money hoarder of being a miser is the Christmas Carol, right? Scrooge, he's a money hoarder, right? In a closed economy where you have somebody hoarding the money supply starts to decrease. That means the money becomes more valuable relative to all the stuff. That means stuff gets very cheap. That means anybody who has money, their money grows in value very quickly as a result of somebody hoarding the money. And so if somebody hoards the money, that one sat or that $1 or that one piece of currency that's still in circulation explodes in value. And that person gets very rich as a result, and they can buy a lot more for that money than they used to. And then at some point, that person who is hoarding the money will spend it. If you look back at oligarchs and family wealth throughout history, eventually all that wealth gets pushed into the system, because if you spoil your kids and they grow up, they're just going to spend it on parties, and that money is going to work its way throughout. It's going to go to yachts, and then the people who built the yachts and those people who they employ, and all the money works back into the system. So whether it's through taxes or through irresponsible spending, or maybe that money gets invested and that invested money goes to create new products and services, that hoarded money will eventually make its way back into the system. But to the extent that it doesn't, it keeps the value of all the other money elevated. And so in a situation like Bitcoin right now, it's not base money. And so we have this opportunity, like let's say it does become money for everybody. There's an asymmetric bet right now where it would have to be worth a lot more. If you look at the total value of all money, it's trillions of dollars at least. Let's say it equals gold, it would have to equal $9 trillion. It's currently worth a little under 1 trillion. So there's this, it has to increase a lot in value just to start being used as money by everybody. At that point, then the money, Bitcoin, would only increase in value as a result of the increase in the total wealth supply as a result of deflation. And so the money hoarding would increase the value of that money to anybody else who has it. And then the other thing is the Lightning Network. Have you guys looked at that at all? So that
We haven't in here,
Okay.
but yeah.
So that potentially will solve the medium of exchange
Yeah,
aspect of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
The cost.
good point. Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Did the monetary history lesson resonate with you? Was that new information for you?
That was great.
Well stated, right? I mean, I especially like how you talk through the 40 years, end of the 1800s into the 1900s, gold standard, gold as a medium of exchange, banknotes, how they started to emerge as a representation of that gold, then the gold standard emerging, right, that we fixed to, and then Bretton Woods that kind of got everybody to agree on a gold standard. And then, oh crap, what happened now when Nixon came around and the US started to, kind of falsify how much gold they had in Fort Knox, right? Crap, now all of a sudden the goose is loose, right? And we're not running now with anything backing our monetary system. So where does it end? I don't know. What do we see over the next 5 years? Might be the next question for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're probably going to see competing monetary systems pop up around the world. We're going to see more and more global trade done in different currencies like we're seeing right now. We're seeing some countries like El Salvador adopt Bitcoin. We're going to see some countries locked down with repression with central bank digital currencies. We're seeing a lot of countries in Eastern Europe that have been loading up on gold for a couple of decades now. We might see an emergence of the gold standard again in certain countries as a competition to say, hey, bring your wealth here because we won't destroy your money with inflation. So I think we'll probably start to see competition between monetary systems, and it's anybody's guess who wins. Yeah.
And then what would happen in relation of the US dollar to comparison to other currencies if all of those countries did start sort of like selling off and going away from the dollar? I assume the value would go down exponentially, and then like trade, we'd run even more trade deficit and even more inflation. And
Until you can't, yeah.
So you can.
Yeah, so the world dumping, right now, the world takes our dollars. At a certain point, you look back all throughout history, every global reserve currency goes through this cycle. We're nearing the end of the cycle. There's a book by Ray Dalio, 2 books, Big Debt Crises and The Changing World Order. Both of those books are really great reads on the long-term cycles of history, but eventually every global reserve currency stops getting used by the rest of the world. And the way that that looks is, number one, the exchange rate just goes to zero. Like nobody will give you anything for dollars. Like the United States used to have a currency called the Continental before the country actually started to fund the war, and it was it hyperinflated and nobody uses it anymore. And so every single fiat currency, except for the ones that we still have today, have eventually gone to zero.
And Ray Dalio goes back way in history. It's
Yeah.
a really, he's got a little YouTube video too.
Yeah,
That's
it's
like
good.
an hour something, but it's pretty quick. It's nice.
Yeah. And so the rest of the world will stop using dollars. And so if I'm China and I don't want my dollars anymore, I could try and give them to Japan, but Japan doesn't want dollars anymore, and neither does Britain. And so who are the only people on earth then at that point that will still take dollars? US. And we're not just going to take dollars for nothing. I mean, we would, but they want something for their dollars. So they're going to buy something from us. So they're going to buy our stocks. They're going to buy our land and our real estate. They're going to buy our inventories in our warehouses, and all the stuff that we bought from around the world will eventually go back and shift it as we get dollars. And that influx of cash would basically look like hyperinflation, where prices skyrocket, the value of the dollar drops relative to everything else. And then you can't do deficits anymore. You can't borrow anymore or spend anymore if nobody will take your cash. So if you're the United States government, you want to pay somebody as a government employee to go do something for you, enforce a law, but they won't take your dollar, then you're bankrupt, you're defaulting. So you've got to then only be able to get other currency that people want to be able to get what you want done. So there's always a shift. At some point, the government has to then just switch over to whatever the people have decided they want.
Interesting times, right?
That's the way of putting it.
Yeah, good. Well, that's great. Joe, thank you so much
Yeah,
for being
thank you
here,
for having me.
for sharing your knowledge.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Thanks for what you do too, just on YouTube, making it available. You're doing great for people. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.